and welcome to 1 Million Cups Riverside. My name's Jay Goth. I'm one of the co-organizers, and today I'm going to talk about something that's near and dear to every entrepreneur's heart. That's getting money, getting funding from investors. And so I've designed a little presentation through TriTech Small Business Development Center called What Angels Want. And basically what I'm doing is going through a template of a presentation that shows you what needs to be included in your presentation to investors and why it's important to them. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, your presentation should be very concise. It shouldn't be long and elaborate. Most entrepreneurs love their business and they want to tell investors everything about their business, when investors really want to know a couple of major points. So that's what we're going to have in these slides, are the major points that investors want to hear. They don't want to see 20 slides of how intricate you have designed your baby. They just want to know that your baby's going to sell and that they're going to be able to make money. So you want no jargon. I know there are a lot of technology startups. They use buzzwords all the time. You got to keep those out. You got to consider that you're talking to an elementary school person. Really keep it simple. If you try and get too elaborate, you're just going to confuse them. And I'll tell you one thing, and a confused investor never does, is write a check. So the very first thing that you need to do is give them a title slide, very briefly tell them who you are, who your company is, and you want to have your contact info on the slide, but you don't want to mention it during your presentation. The very next slide should be something about the problem that you're overcoming. Investors love getting involved with companies that are solving a big problem. If you're not solving a problem and you're just inventing a better mousetrap, your odds of catching an investor's attention go down significantly. And there are several things that investors want to know. What problem are you solving? Are you a solution looking for a problem? What I mean by that is, a lot of people come up with something and it doesn't really address a need in the market, but they think it's really cool. So they try and get investors to see a problem that really doesn't exist, and the investors will see through that. So don't try and be the mousetrap looking for a mouse to catch. Be the mousetrap that has a big mouse problem. And then if it's a world changer, that really gets their attention. So obviously something to do with the environment, a new technology, something disruptive, a new medical breakthrough. Those are the kind of things that investors really like to sink their teeth into. The solution to the problem is your baby. You want it very simple, and you want to tell them how it solves the problem. A lot of times people get off on a tangent talking about what their product is, and they never really talk about how it solves the problem. And they want to know why you can help the world or society or whatever you're trying to help, or a certain niche. It doesn't have to be an overarching thing. It just needs to be a specific problem that you have a solution to. The next part of the puzzle is, how do you make money? It could be the best idea in the world, but if there's not a way to make money, the investors aren't going to want to invest because they're putting money into a project to get money out. If it is something that's philanthropical, there's nothing wrong with that, but you definitely want to go for grants, or you're going in a different direction. That's not an investor pitch. That's more of a grant or philanthropic pitch. You need to keep it simple, and I always say that graphics are a lot better. Generally, I see a lot of slide decks that have a whole bunch of words on them, and you want to stay away from that. You really want to go to a slide deck that's very simple, bullet points like this, and graphics are always better. They say a picture tells 1,000 words. You want the audience looking to you and listening to what you have to say. You don't want them trying to read a slide while you're talking, because then their attention's unfocused, and again, you're leading to confusion. They won't get the main points that you want to make. And basically the question you're solving is, how do you do what you say you can do? Every entrepreneur should have some secret sauce. Sometimes it's the management team, sometimes it's the technology itself, sometimes it's the unique solution to a problem that nobody's ever thought of before. But people want to know why you and not somebody else. And so you've got to differentiate yourself. And the key thing is you need to know who your customer is, how you're going to reach them, how you're going to get them to spend money. So you need to have a very simple slide on your marketing and sales approach, because no matter how great your technology is, if nobody buys it, the investor is not going to make money. And so, we have an old saying in the industry, will the dog eat the dog food? If you put a product out there and you don't get any buyers, maybe you have a freemium product that's a very popular method of going to market. So you give everyone something for free. If you can't convert them into paying customers, you don't have a viable business model. The next thing is, who's your competition? And a lot of entrepreneurs make a big mistake. They'll stand up in front of an investor or a group of investors and they'll say, we don't have any competition. Well, the fact is, everyone has competition. If you haven't found your competition yet, that's just because you don't know about them. But there is somebody in the world thinking the same thing you're thinking about the same problem you're trying to address. And there is competition out there. And one of the things that I like to see in a competition slide is if you have a number of advantages over your competition, if you put a simple grid together and you list all the features and benefits that are most important to your customers, and you meet most of those criteria and the other ones have big gaps, that's an easy graphic way for you to show the investor how you're better than everyone else. If you have intellectual property, say a patent or something like that, now's the time to tell them about that, because that's something that can keep them from entering your market. It's called a barrier to entry, and investors love barriers to entry. Personally, I think a lot of times barriers to entry are kind of overblown, but I know that investors love them, so you want to tailor your pitch to what the investor wants, not to what you believe. The key about your team, it doesn't have to be complete. You don't have to have everybody on your team already. In most cases, when you're a startup, it's one or two people, and you know what holes you're going to need to fill, but you need some funding to fill the holes, or you need some good referrals to get to the people that you need to bring on board. So what the investor wants to know is that you've thought this out. You've figured out that you do have holes. And usually investors are very anxious to help you fill your team because they have a Rolodex. When you're looking for an investor, you're not just looking for money. You're looking for access to the contacts they have, the industry connections, the possible people who would want to be on your team. So you want to tell them why each person, your bios shouldn't be, they did this, they did that, they did this, they did that. That's not the important thing. The important thing is, what did they do in their past that makes them so important to your team today? That's the important part of how you've built your team. Every investor wants to get an idea of what your numbers look like. They're not going to believe your numbers, believe me, because most numbers are pie in the sky. As startups, we always have to start somewhere. We have to say, well, if we can sell this widget for this much, and we can sell this many widgets in year one, and this many in year two, and this many in year three, and it's going to cost us this much to build a widget, you can come up with a very basic pro forma over 5 years that'll tell them what you expect to receive in revenue, what you expect your costs will be, and what your net profit will be. Usually investors like to see a hockey stick, so they don't mind seeing a slow growth curve the first couple years, but then as things pick up, they do like to see that little zoom up in revenue. And believe me, investors are always going to knock your numbers down. The one thing you don't want to do when you're presenting this slide is say, we have come up with some very conservative projections. Investors hate the word conservative. To them, that's a big red flag, because obviously you think it's conservative, and obviously they think you're wildly optimistic. So basically what you want to do is say, based upon the research we've done, these are the numbers that we think we can hit. Okay? So basically they just want to know that you can make money, because if you're not going to make money, they're not going to make money. And if they're not going to make money, they're not going to invest. Now, depending on how you're presenting, you're going to want to have a deal slide. And a deal slide is simply you know, what you think your company's worth today, what you're willing to give up for the amount of money you're looking for, and most importantly, what a lot of people forget to put on this slide is where the money's going to go. Because if they're going to write you a check for $250,000 and you've got a salesman at the Mercedes dealership waiting for you to make your deposit, that's not a good use of funds. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for you to put the money into legal, accounting, marketing, hiring. You know, you have to have that all thought out. And then ultimately, they're going to want to know what your exit strategy is. So for most startups, your exit strategy is going to be some kind of acquisition. You know, we're going to grow it to this level. At that point, we think our valuation based upon our revenue projections will be X, and we expect to sell the company at that point. So that gives the investor a way that they can put it into their head and do their calculations, which say, okay, if I put in X amount and I'm going to get Y equity and we're going to sell at Z, then I'm going to get A. So you want them to be able, you don't build that model for them, just give them the information they need to come up with their own calculations, because you don't want to paint a picture and have it be something completely different from what they're thinking. You want them to build the picture, and then in a later presentation or meeting, they can tell you what they think the picture is. A lot of times, if you're in a big public event, like we have a Tech Coast Angels pitch competition next week, if you're going in front of the public, you don't want this slide in your deck, because what that does is it triggers something called general solicitation rules. I'm not going to go into the specifics, but basically, if you tell people you're looking for money in public, you're generally soliciting. What that means to the SEC and the regulators is that you are making a public offering of your private company, which is allowed, but in order to do that, you have to file with the SEC at least 15 business days ahead of time, which means if you do that and you haven't filed, you're in violation. You don't want to be doing that. So I would say keep this slide out of your deck if you're not in a room of only investors. So the next steps after you give your quick presentation, as you can see, it's not very long. It's very simple, very concise. It gives them the points. What you're trying to do is whet their appetite. They're not going to write you a check the very first time you get in front of them. What they want to do is get that trigger in their brain that says, I like this, I can see myself being involved. If you have a room of 10 investors, the odds are maybe 2 or 3 of them will be interested. If you watch Shark Tank, you know, a lot of times the people will present, and, I'm out, I'm out, I'm out, but there's always one guy who says, this looks interesting, let me dive in a little more. That's what you want to do, is find the guy or lady who says, I want to know a little bit more. And you want to get the next meeting. The key to getting the money is being prepared. So that's a whole nother subject. It involves how do you prepare for an investor's due diligence. It's a very, very tedious and time-consuming effort, but it'll pay off if you do the work ahead of time. You don't want to be scrambling. When you get somebody who's ready to write you a check and says, I need to see this, 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 and this, and you don't have any of it, you just aren't prepared, and then you don't look ready to the investor, and a lot of times it'll turn an investor off. So you want to have your due diligence package prepared ahead of time, and basically you want to get the money.